Hi there, this is Connor the Language Czar. So today I'm in Lviv in Western Ukraine with my buddy Jan Fondora of Language Boost. Go check out his channel, it's called Language Boost.
Hello everyone.
So Jan has been here for about, I think, 10 days at this stage, more or less, in Lviv. And Jan is actually learning Russian, and I'm here to learn Ukrainian. And Lviv is located in Western Ukraine, where the majority of people speak Ukrainian, and they don't speak Russian as their first language. Now this is quite different to, say, Kiev or Odessa or Kharkiv and other cities in Ukraine where Russian is very, very common and probably still the dominant language that's spoken in everyday discourse. So what we're going to discuss in this video is what is it like to, if you don't speak Ukrainian and you try to speak Russian in this part of Ukraine. So Jan, you've been learning Russian not for very long, so it's not very, very strong yet. And you've been here in Lviv for 10 days. And to speak with local people, you don't speak Ukrainian, so you've tried to converse in Russian. So how's that gone for you?
That works very well. I only have to say that that you have to be very clear that you don't speak Ukrainian. If you approach someone in a restaurant, for example, and you start speaking Russian, they would often just reply in Ukrainian. So you have to be clear, you have to say that you don't speak Ukrainian, otherwise you just reply in Ukrainian. I find that in general, that the people are fine with it. I mean, probably they can hear from my accent that I'm not Russian, and that I'm just a tourist that use Russian as a lingua franca here. And they accept that, they understand it, and they reply in Russian if you tell them that you don't speak Ukrainian. So that works pretty well. Yeah.
Okay, well that's an interesting experience, because when I came to Lviv for the first time, it was 2009, and it was extremely hard to speak in Russian here. People really insisted on using Ukrainian, and they didn't give me much of a leeway being a foreigner. So what's happened in Ukraine, if you've paid attention to the international politics and what's been happening here, is there's been a conflict with Russia in the last 3 years since the overthrow of the Yanukovych government during the as a result of the Euromaidan protests. And what I see kind of paradoxically is that it's actually easier to use Russian in Lviv than it was before the conflict. And I think there's several reasons for this. One is the fact that there are actually more Russian speakers who've moved here, because with the conflict in the east of the country, a huge number of people have either moved to Russia or they've moved to Kiev or to this part of Ukraine. So there are actually more Russian speakers when you go to the cafes, restaurants, and you hear a lot more Russian on the street.
So you mean that Russian is more accepted by the local people here?
Well, it's definitely spoken more by more people in the city. And second of all, with this conflict with Russia and with the conflict obviously in the east and obviously with Crimea's annexation, what you see is that there's less tension between people who speak Russian and people who speak Ukrainian, because both there's more national solidarity.
Exactly. They will welcome people that come from the east.
Exactly here. So you have a less of a distinction based on language. At least that's been my impression as I've traveled around Lviv, that speaking Russian is not seen as something maybe anti-Ukrainian like it was maybe in the past, because obviously a lot of the country speaks Russian as their first language and are bilingual in fact and speak Ukrainian. I think it will be different, and that will be something we're going to explore in another video, is what is it like as a Ukrainian if you speak Russian and don't speak Ukrainian and you come here, because of course we're two non-Ukrainians and non-native Russian speakers, so as you said, we're probably given a little bit more leeway. So
the thing is that maybe we should mention that as well, that basically everyone in Ukraine understands Russian, right?
They should understand more or less what you're saying in Russian. Not always 100%. If they grew up in a Ukrainian-speaking village, for example, maybe they're not so exposed. But in general, everybody should be able to understand you, even if they can't reply in Russian.
So if you come to Lviv and you speak Russian, you should be fine. And otherwise, you can always try English, of course, which is not spoken by too many people here, but I've had some waiters that noticed that I'm a foreigner and they started speaking English as well. So that
can happen.
Something to
that can happen. So stay tuned for the next video, in which we're going to speak with a native speaker of Russian about what it's like if you come to Lviv and you speak Russian as opposed to Ukrainian, what their experience is like and what their impressions. So it's Do Pobachення, which means goodbye in Ukrainian, and
Das Svidanya.
Das Svidanya from Lviv in Western Ukraine.